speaking of marriage,
Yeah.
you did a study on marriage structure.
Yes.
And how it affects the workplace.
Yes.
Which is something I think is such an interesting connection that people tend to overlook.
Yes.
So it seems like you found that men who were in traditional marriages
Right.
versus more modern
Right.
structured marriages tended to not favor women at the
Right.
workplace or promoting women or feeling like they were productive leaders.
Right.
Tell me a
Yes.
little bit about these findings
Yes.
and how it impacts women in the workplace.
Yes. So this is work I've done with Sridhari Desai at the University of North Carolina and Art Brief, who's at the University of Utah. And it's exactly as you framed it. We really were resisting this notion that you can truly separate the home and the work and sort of the psychology you carry back and forth. I know my same heart and mind goes with me to both places.
Yeah.
And we were speculating that that's got to be a challenge if you're a man in the 21st century in the United States, and in the workplace we're talking a lot about the gender gap and level playing field and egalitarian. And at the same time, for personal reasons that are incredibly valid, in your own home, you've chosen to have a gendered division of labor. And the gendered division of labor reflects traditional gender roles where the man is doing the more status attaining activity, making money, working outside the home, and the woman is doing the work that traditionally is viewed as lower status in our society, raising the children, maintaining the home. And in that setting, it seemed to me and my co-authors that it would be very challenging for that husband to navigate, to code switch between these two environments. Like, it almost seems psychologically impossible.
Right.
So we were curious, can they, do they? So what we did, you can't, unfortunately it's a little tricky, you can't randomly assign people to either a traditional marriage or a modern marriage. It turns out that that's a little outside the scope of a lab study. So there's no perfect way to study this, and knowing that, what we wanted to do was look at it from a lot of different angles and run this research question through different tests and see if we come out with the same outcome no matter how we look at it. So we ran studies in the laboratory where we simply asked people who were in traditional marriages to consider different kinds of workplaces, some with women and some not with women, and saw how they reacted. We looked at survey data that's been done in both the United States and in Great Britain that's been done over time, and we compared how men in traditional marriages responded versus men in non-traditional marriages. We conducted surveys of our own. So together we put together 5 studies, and we found, as you summarized, that men in traditional marriages were more likely to have a negative attitude towards women in the workplace. On first blush, that doesn't strike people as counterintuitive. Well, that sort of makes sense, because if I'm a man in a traditional marriage, I've shaped my home to reflect my values. My wife and I have shaped my home, and that those same values would carry into the workplace. That seems logical. But here's the crazy part. Our longitudinal data suggest that change happened after marriage, not before. So it wasn't that we went into the marriage that reflected our values that we then took into the workplace. There was something about living in the gendered division of labor at home that shaped our values that we took into the workplace. That's what we think we see in this longitudinal data. That's a more complicated story, and it's harder to think about what advice to give, because of course our home lives are our own and should reflect what works best for our families, and every family has their own needs. And at the same time, that kind of code switching, if it's that hard, we've got to figure out as an organization how to make it easier. And so I think the takeaway for organizations of a study like ours is to think about, to understand that these are human beings that come into our workplace, that we say, okay, gender gap, let's all be egalitarian now. And it's not as easy as flipping a switch. Everyone's trying, But we got to realize we're all bringing in both conscious and unconscious associations that could be affecting how we operate in that environment. So the more we can sort of nudge and inspire and prime and leverage all the social psychological research out there to create an environment that leads to the more egalitarian outcome, as opposed to just hoping we can will ourselves into code switching more perfectly. Again, bounded ethicality. None of us are perfect. We're all trying our best.